Welcome back to the channel. I'm Michelle and I have an unhealthy addiction to projects. I don't do anything the normal way and this decking was no different. We had a very tight budget and only spent around £1,600 or around $2,000 to transform our garden from a complete mess to something we could actually present to people. We created lots of additional usable space and we made the garden a lot more cozy and inviting. I did all of this work over 3 weekends, so it didn't take very long. And the best thing is that we have saved over £3,000 on the cheapest quote we had received. And I know it wouldn't have been built to the same quality and to the same level of attention to detail. So let me share how I built this deck so you can hopefully get the confidence to tackle something similar in the future. The first thing I do with large projects like these is to measure everything carefully and then throw it into SketchUp so I can play around with the ideas and different types of materials. And it's basically a really good way to make early mistakes and to figure out whether your idea will actually translate properly into reality or whether you need to make some adjustments. SketchUp also lets you measure everything and allows you to create a pretty accurate list of materials so you can go and get quotes. Those paving slabs had been placed onto bare ground by the previous owner, which means that they started moving around over the years. The garden is also very sloped, which makes it harder to get useful space from it. Luckily I was able to overcome those issues with a few tricks you'll see in a second. The pile of wood you can see here was all ordered online and delivered to my door a couple of days later. As mentioned earlier, the total cost of everything, including brackets and screws, was around £1,600 or around $2,000. All the wood you see is treated against fungus and rot, which is essential for a decking. Step 1 was to establish a reference point against the house. Unfortunately, I could only go to a certain height because the double door that you see there on the left is much lower than the kitchen door, and also because of the slope of the garden. Starting any higher would have meant that we would have ended up with a very high step between the deck and the grass. I've wrapped the wooden beams that go against the wall in a thick plastic material that we call DPF or damp proof membrane here in the UK. In hindsight it was probably overkill because I left enough room around the board so air can circulate, but then again I'm not known for doing things the easy way. I left most of the old paving slabs in place on purpose, as they would provide a pretty stable surface, but I did have to remove a few to make space for the wooden beam. Disturbing the other slabs would have created more problems than it's worth though, as I would have had to bring in tons of crushed stone and I would have had to compact that. And that would have made the project much more expensive, so leaving them in place was the most efficient and the cheapest way for me to do this. And it's actually proven itself over the years. The decking has not moved since we put it down. I drilled holes in the wall at regular intervals and then used 2-component epoxy resin to secure the wooden beam to the wall. I learned over the years that this provides much better holding strength in brick in particular than using just regular anchor bolts without the resin. You can see here that there's 2 nuts on each bolt. I did that to keep a gap between the board and the wall to allow air to circulate. We get an awful lot of rain here in the UK, so having that air circulation is absolutely critical. Once the bolts are inserted into the wall, any excess resin will fill the gaps inside the brick and then ooze out. I also made sure that the boards were properly supported while the resin was drying so that they wouldn't accidentally move on me. By the way, that resin gets rock hard within about 20 to 25 minutes. When the resin had hardened, I tightened the nuts on the other side of the boards, and I then moved on to laying out the larger square section of the deck. And I could then see where I needed to dig the foundation holes for the concrete posts that would support this part of the deck. I chose concrete posts because they would keep the wood off the ground and as much as possible away from the moisture we get here in the UK. The posts are about 60 centimeters long, or around 2 feet. The holes are another 30 centimeters or another foot deeper. Once I had the holes where they needed to go, I put the square frame together permanently, leveled and squared it, and then suspended the posts from the wooden frame over their holes. I could then safely fill in the holes with what we call postcrete without having to worry about the posts moving around. Postcrete is a quick drying concrete mix that provides pretty decent strength. I threw in some pieces of brick and stone I had lying around to make the concrete mix go a little bit further. Waste not, want not. I then leveled the soil to create an air gap under the future rafters and started securing the joist hangers to the beam on the wall. I covered the ground under the deck with weed membrane and then fitted the rafters. They're spaced at around 16 inches on center and additionally supported in the middle of the span, and I'll show you how in a second. I fitted the first decking board right at the end there to give me something to work towards. The next day I ran a string line in the middle of the span over the top of the rafters so that I could then use some packing shims to get all the rafters in line with each other. As long as you use enough of these shims, they can take a significant amount of weight. I additionally secured them all with construction adhesive so that they wouldn't shift over time. I changed my mind at the last minute and decided not to run the decking boards in parallel with the house, even though that would have been the simplest and quickest way to do it. I just wanted something a little more unusual. So I placed them at a 45-degree angle to the house, and that also improved the drainage because in combination with a 1-inch drop, the water then had somewhere to go away from the house. I started in the top corner, placed the boards with a consistent spacing and slowly worked my way towards the grass. As this was the first time I had done something like this, I had to go slow and figure it all out as I went along. The most important thing I learned was to have enough noggins or enough pieces of rafter that you can screw the decking boards into. Here's a quick view of a jig I made to make it easier to mount the joist hangers to the rafters on the wall. Getting these consistent without a jig took a fair amount of fiddling and a bit of cursing. The 15 minutes I spent on building the jig was absolutely worth it. I'd completely eliminated the measuring, gassing and the inconsistency. Once I got to a certain stage with the first part of the deck, I had to start laying out the second group of rafters, as the boards run at an angle to the house. The process was basically a repeat of what you have already seen. The next day was basically more of the same. Fit the last few rafters, the noggins and the outside board, then level and square everything, and then basically continue fitting the decking boards at regular intervals. And that's all there is to it. Rinse and repeat. I left all the decking boards only roughly cut to length, because it's a lot easier to cut them all together later on in one go. And you can see that we wasted no time to start making use of the additional level space in the garden. By the way, that yellow mark on the wall there is a hint to another video that will be released very soon. Punching a large hole in the garden wall. You can see here how quickly that deck transformed the feeling of the garden, and having the boards run at an angle also made it look so much nicer than it would have been otherwise. The last few jobs were to cut the excess off the decking boards and finish off the perimeter and the boards along the wall. I then built a new step and I fitted the vertical boards along the grass edge. As you can see, the decking turned out amazingly well and completely exceeded our expectations. It totally transformed the garden. In the next video, I'll show you how I built that little paving area my wife is sitting on and how I punched a hole in the garden wall to build a new gate. Thank you so much for making this far. If you enjoy these videos, please consider leaving a like to help out the channel and to promote the video to others on YouTube. I'll hopefully see you again in the next one. Bye!